This is The Whisper of Flames, a story written by myself. The request for this story comes from Aurora McNamara, asking something to do with the song Arsonist's Lullaby by Hosier. Thank you so much to Aurora for this awesome request and the awesome song recommendation as well. For those of you who have not heard the song before, again, it's called Arsonist's Lullaby by Hosier, and it is very good, so I suggest you give it a listen. And now, on with our story. There was something about it that Remus could never find the strength to look away. Brilliant, blazing, almost calling him to it. He savored its glow, wished to send its beauty careening through the universe, if not to expose the whole mindscape to its radiance. But out of all of it, there was one thing that left his eyes wide. His fascination peaked even higher than he could have thought. No matter how close to embers it became, the flames always licked higher. Roman's absence had been the first time he truly saw fire. That night, it had been so dark. Oh, dark. All he could do was scream into the void of an unbuilt imagination, begging the man in blue to return his brother. He had pulled his jacket close, wrapping his arms as tight around his body as he could. This had been for his own good, the man had explained. It would be better this way. Somehow, Remus didn't believe him. He shivered, though that night it was not because of the cold. Janice had been the first to find him. There was no hesitation in his eyes then. He had simply picked up Remus and carried him to his home. Remus's home now. Remus remembered a hearth, and within it, a crackling blaze. It had soothed the chill in his veins and dried his tears, and though it could not fill the void of a brother gone, it had soothed the ache in his heart. The flames beckoned him to listen, to lean closer and learn to heal broken wounds. He was a fool to let such thoughts pour in. Later, Janice had padded down the stairs, finding him still crouched in front of the flame. "Little one, are you all right?" he had asked, but Remus just nodded. He didn't need to sleep just yet, not when the flames had to be kept in check. Too much freedom, and they would spread, destroying everything, just as Remus already had. He wasn't going to lose someone else. No, this time he would keep his chaos on a leash, before it ended up tearing him from anyone else he loved. He didn't see the fire again after that night, though Remus knew it was still there. Sometimes it would spark, illuminating thoughts in his mind. So enticing, it always sang with words of power, though Remus knew their true nature. He pushed them far away, down, 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 until all it could illuminate was a forgotten void. No matter how hard he tried, it always seemed to resurface. It happened again months after the separation. Janice sat at the kitchen table, calmly sipping from a cup of tea and reading a thick novel, while Virgil remained curled up on the couch, headphones on and a blanket around his shoulders. Remus sat at the center of this, observing his home from the floor. Crisscross he sat and tried his best to take in the silence, something that was a rare occurrence in the house. Janice was smiling softly. He had even found enough peace to turn on the record player, allowing the room to be enveloped in a sweet jazz. It was something Remus should have enjoyed, just a normal thing with a normal atmosphere. But something inside him sparked. He wished to destroy it all. At first, Remus shoved down the urge, yet deep down he knew the spark was a part of him. It would resurface eventually, and when it did, it would burn. Crackling in a blaze of glory, they would finally see what Remus could do. He sat, savoring each second of the silence. This was serene, he reminded himself. Something so perfect should not be changed. His fingers began to tremble, restless as Remus tried desperately to sit still. One breath, and the flame had ignited, coursing through Remus's veins and bringing a cackle from his throat. Before he could think, before anyone could so much as notice the mischief in his eyes, he had thrust his hand forward. The shattering of a glass was music to his ears. "Remus!" Janice cried from the kitchen table, jumping back from an insect crawling through a puddle of spilled tea. "Would you like to explain why there is a stag beetle in my Earl Grey?" The fire vanished, not gone forever, but merely returning to its hearth. With it, Remus paused, and his hand slowly dropped to his side. He had set it free, even if it was just for a moment. "Well?" Janice said, warily watching the beetle make its way across the table. "I'm awaiting an explanation." Remus started, though found himself in silence. Janice could not know if this power, his thirst for destruction, if he knew, Janice could throw him out, steal all he held dear just as the other one had done. I don't know," he said, forcing a chuckle that left his chest tight. "Guess I just missed having a touch of nature in here." At this, Janice's expression softened. "I see. Next time, please just be sure to spawn such creatures away from my tea." "I will." "Thank you, Remus." Janice's lips turned up into a smile, and it was just so genuine. Remus knew him and V wouldn't forgive so easily if they knew the truth. The next day, Remus came downstairs to find the stag beetle in a freshly made terrarium, along with a small potted plant. Just to the side held a folded note, reading, "Figured I shouldn't remove your touch of nature. Feel free to keep him as long as you'd like, though I do ask that your beetle is welcome to share the space with Virgil's tarantula. You know how much he adores that spider. Signed, Janice." He smiled at the gesture. It was kind despite everything Remus had done. Still, it was incapable of quenching the fire in his blood. Remus woke up with a start. Years later, and he still wasn't able to manage the nightmares. Tonight was the worst of them all. There had been screaming, slicing through the air like a knife. He had searched for the source of the sound, only to find nothing. All until the image became clear. Chaos had surrounded him, and with it, the faces of all those he cared for. The air was sharp with the scent of gasoline, soaking his clothes and dripping from his hair. Remus had heard them cry out to him in pain, and he willed himself to move forward, only for the air to catch a flame. It had taken seconds for the space to engulf in a burst of light and heat. The cries grew louder, piercing Remus's mind as he had tried to reach them. His legs had become lead, unmovable even as he caught sight of his brother, tears turning to steam as the fire grew taller. Remus had begun to scream himself, willing himself to wake and leave such horrors. That was when the worst part had come. Someone looking just like himself came into view, grinning wildly. It was like viewing through a broken mirror, the pieces cut sharp and piercing. He watched himself step from the shadows and look at the havoc surrounding him, and as the pained voices of those Remus loved grew louder, his copy had raised his head to the skies and laughed. Shivers still ran down Remus's spine at the memory, having awoken from such nightmares doing nothing to halt the racing of his mind. The sounds of cackling still echoed in his ears as he shook the fear from his veins, and in the back of it all, he could still feel the heat. That fire had followed him into his consciousness, and with it came the thoughts. Tendrils wrapped around his mind, convincing him with words of honey that it was only a dream, that he still had control. Remus couldn't bring himself to believe it. He stood from his bed, the sheets still tangling around his ankles. Out of everywhere in the mindscape, there was only one place he could manage to accept what was real and what was fantasy. The door was only a few paces down the hall, and Remus didn't even stop to knock before wrenching it open and bounding inside. He flicked on the light and was met with a hiss as someone struggled to pull the covers over their eyes. "Dear heavens, Remus, it's 3 a.m. Janice called from under his blanket, still sensitive to the brightness of the room. "I need to ask you some things." Janice sighed, annoyance dripping from his voice, even when muffled beneath the covers. "Can this not wait till morning?" "Please," Remus pleaded. "I need you, Janice. It's important." The older side groaned and slowly rose. His eyes remained half-lidded, lazy with the tug of sleep still pulling at his senses, though all of that disappeared once he took in Remus's expression. "What happened?" He grew still, eyes going dark as he took in the sight of Remus's wide eyes and quickened breathing. "Nightmare," Remus barely managed to mutter before he slumped into Janice's arms, hiding his face in the tears that surely accompanied it. He felt the side's arms wrap around his middle, and for once the chill of his scale-covered skin was welcomed. It soothed the burning in Remus's core, the one that whispered memories of what had filled his mind. Still, he felt the sharp lick of fire rising through his limbs, beckoning him to leave. Fighting it only increased its searing pull. Remus forced the feeling deep down and tried to focus on Janice's hands that had slowly begun to rub circles on his back. "Do you want to talk about it?" Janice whispered into Remus's hair, gently combing the curls from his face. Remus shook his head, clutching the edges of Janice's capelet tighter. "All right, I'll leave it be." He resumed the trace pattern on Remus's back, and the feeling of cool scales against his skin slowly drew the panic from his mind. A flower. That's what Janice traced, over and over again. Beautiful, unlike the visions Remus couldn't seem to dispel. "Jan, you can pick lies from the truth, right?" The hand on his back froze, startled by the question. Remus didn't elaborate, only raising to meet Janice's eyes with an expression of stone. Yes, that is one of my skills. Why do you ask such things?" "Because the nightmares haven't stopped." Something flashed in Janice's eyes, and whether it was worry or curiosity, Remus really didn't know, though a moment later the side was nodding, his eyes already beginning to glow a brilliant shade of yellow. "What do you wish to know?" he asked, head tilted in the way he always did when thinking deeply. It was in that moment, though, that the words were stolen from Remus's throat. The thirst for answers that had compelled him just before had been replaced with dread, blazing and molten. Coating his insides like magma, protest clung to his thoughts. If he told Janice of this, what would the side think? Surely he would believe Remus to be a monster. No sane boy had dreams of such ruin. Was that what he was? Insane? The fire inside flickered at that, delighted by such a title. Remus gulped, steadying himself in the gaze of Janice's eyes. This was the one who had taken him in, cared for him when no one else would. If there was anyone that could help, Janice was it. "My dream," Remus breathed, wringing his hands. I dreamt of bad things, ones that made me afraid, and yet I watched myself laugh. I was cackling as everything burned, as everyone was screaming. Janice's silence did nothing to conceal the worry in his eyes. Remus continued, opting to look at the wall instead of whatever troubled expression Janice now possessed. Those should be bad things, horrible things, but I was still grinning like I enjoyed it. I tell myself it was just a dream, that it wasn't me, but I just don't know anymore. He shifted in Janice's arms, leaning his head against the deceitful side shoulder. No response arose, and the room remained silent for long enough that Remus glanced up. Janice's eyes were distant, the golden glow alight like a sliver of sunshine in an otherwise barren room. "Jan?" Remus whispered, startling as the other broke from his daze. "It wasn't really me, right?" Janice opened his mouth to speak, though no words emerged. His eyes darted as if flipping between responses, both seeming like they would inflict a damage unrepairable. Remus hated the silence and the way it stretched like the magma in his blood. After what seemed like an eternity, Janice pulled Remus into a tight embrace. Tears soaked into his clothing, the side he had always known to be so suave and collected, nearly in pieces before him. He tried to hide the shaking in his voice, feeling the way the flames danced in his mind, mocking him with each flutter of light. "Janice? Am I bad?" Janice glanced up, and with tears running down his cheeks, whispered, "I don't know, Remus. I don't know." Remus didn't fall asleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. The nightmares somehow still managed to find him. Remus didn't remember when his side of the imagination had grown so dark. All he could recall was how pleased his fire seemed when his realm became twisted with creatures in ruin. That had kept it quiet for a while, long enough that Remus thought it had gone forever. Only the naive assumed such things. In his tower, Remus sat, the cool stones offering the only bit of comfort he could keep. Everything else had been tarnished by his thoughts, by him. He ignored Janice's reassurances, promising him that nothing was wrong, that he wasn't making things worse. But if nothing was wrong, then why was he ablaze? Smoke swirling through him like a sick kind of entity, it left him gasping for both air and a sense of normalcy. "Imagine cutting an ear off, just like Van Gogh," it whispered to him during dinner. Remus would never forget the look on Janice and Virgil's faces when he had shared the idea. He stopped speaking during meals. "Steal Virgil's spider. See if we can teach it to swim," he had been commanded one morning. The flicker was so enticing, Remus hadn't realized what he had done until he had seen Virgil's face pale. Resurrecting the pet still hadn't stopped the tears from falling, or the angered cries that followed. He stopped going near anything that wasn't his own. "Grasshoppers would make an interesting addition," the voice chirped as Remus was stirring a bowl of cake batter, an apology gift to Janice for turning their kitchen table into splinters. He shook his head and pushed the thought away, though a lick of fire shot up his spine, searing until he complied. Janice had fallen ill after eating the treats, holed up in his room for 3 days after hearing of the special ingredient. Remus stopped returning from the imagination altogether. Tears pricked his eyes as he wrapped his arms tighter around himself. The silence. He hated it. But there was nowhere else to go. not without hurting the others. He could feel the flames growing deep inside him. They sang songs of power and bliss, begging him to leave this fortress. Remus wished greatly to follow the sweet lies coming from the glow, to expose the whole world to its smoldering beauty. It took every last bit of his effort not to unleash such horrors. When left contained for too long, the crackle surfaced deeper in his core. Remus winced as it no longer became a mere thought, but a presence, spreading through his veins and burning everything in its wake. Farther down, he tried to press the feeling, only for him to go up in smoke. Dread pooled in his stomach as a knock sounded from his door. "Remus?" a voice called, just as soft as the knocking on the door. "I need to speak with you." "Don't come in!" Remus cried, pressing his eyes shut. "Please, Remus." The voice was desperate, as if on the verge of tears. Something has happened." Remus recognized the voice as Janice's. He sagged at the way the other sounded. So desperate. More than anything, Remus wished to open that door, though as great as his worry was, the blaze inside him had other desires. "Let me be," he mumbled. "I don't want to talk right now." Janice sighed, frustration bubbling in his tone. "This isn't just a little chit-chat, don't you understand? I'm not going to just let you ignore this." "Go away," Remus choked. "I can't. I'm sorry, but I'm coming in." The turn of the doorknob echoed through the tower, and Remus stilled, nails digging into his skin as he gripped his arms like a lifeline. "No, don't wait!" he cried, panic flooding his eyes as Janice stepped into the room. He wasn't sure who looked worse at that moment. Trails of crimson ran down his fingers. His skin pricked from gripping too tightly. His eyes remained wide like an animal snared, both afraid and ready to fight. Janice was no better, his hair disheveled and fresh tears running down his cheeks. He shook like a leaf, the polished appearance he had always been able to uphold, now easily seeming like a distant fantasy. "Why did you come in?" Remus whispered, his skin burning from a million fantasies. Terror and turmoil filled them all. "I told you not to come in." "Virgil is gone," Janice said, voice darkened. Gone. The word flashed through his mind. Gone, just like his brother. Gone, just like the nights free of wretched dreams. Gone, and never to return, just as everything had until now. He hated that word, hated the memories that surfaced from it and the fire that consumed it all. And just like that, Remus himself was gone, mere ashes in comparison to the flames that emerged. "I'm so sorry," he heard Janice mutter distantly. "I know it's difficult, but we'll get through it together, just like we always have. Right, Remus?" No response. His breathing grew heavy, an effort to escape the smoke filling his lungs. No longer would the mindscape be shielded from the beauty of the fire. His fire. Too long had he tried to hold it back. Limbs heavy, he pushed past the deceitful side and out of the imagination. The place was familiar to him, and within a few turns he had reached it. The large purple door loomed over him, empty now. What was left of Remus filled with a sense of sorrow, though there was no reason to fret. That soon would be gone too. Footsteps echoed behind him, calling with frightened worries. Remus couldn't hear it over the blaze of light. Again, The thrill of the first night filled his veins, images of that old hearth again soothing the emptiness inside him. This has been The Whisper of Flames. Thank you so much again to Aurora McNamara for the amazing request, and to all of you who are listening right now. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I will see you next time for another story.